Hey, spooksters! Diandra here at Copper Cat Books in Henderson, Nevada. We're on our way inside to find our first book for our first episode of Secondhand Horror. Let's see what we can find. Date me, baby, one more time. We are going with Toten-Tanz, about a guardian of the Goblet of Youth and somebody that needs to be hit her, but it's hard because she's so sexy and smart. Hey, look, we got him! Coppercat had so many amazing books, it was really hard to make a decision. We kept going back and forth, but out of everything, out of all the synopses we read, these were the two standouts. They are going to be awesome to kick off this series. It's going to rock your world. Can't wait.
Hey spooksters, and welcome to our new show, Secondhand Horror, where we find interesting, unique horror books from secondhand stores and read them to you like you're 5 years old. Based upon votes from our followers, we've found that our first book is going to be Totentanz by author Sarrantonio. He's written over 60 books and 90 short stories. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. There was ice in the summer night, but it was not in the trees or on the ground. It was not in the July air, hot and close to them, as sticky as dried vanilla ice cream. Their skins sweated because of the night, yet there was nothing but snow in their bones. Ice, long shivers of it, ran through them like clear, cold blood. The box opened, Reggie Carson said in a fierce whisper, leaning forward, spreading his hands over his two friends like an Old Testament prophet. And the thing sat straight up, its waxy face running flesh, its eyeballs popping out, and in its half-eaten hand it held the claw. Reggie tossed something at them, a mass of twigs or pipe cleaners in the shape of a talon. They jumped, and another wash of cool fright broke over them, and then rolled back. Heat lightning flashed suddenly overhead, illuminating the scene like a postcard. 3 boys on a hill in a churchyard. Around them, like bumps on a blanket, sat 1,000 graves in neatly planted rows or older, jumbled clusters. Just behind the 3 boys, on the summit of their grave hill, stood a mystery vault, a squat, locked death box, its darkly mottled stained glass windows like eyes, its big rectangular door like an owl's hoot and mouth. Another lightning flash, revealing those 3 boys, Jack and Pup, sitting down, knees drawn up, a scattering of candy wrappers and sandwich leavings around them, a knocked-over can of Coke, and a half-full bottle of orange soda between them. Their faces looked up, expectantly at Reggie, who stood above them, dark face, momentarily still. "Tell us about the tomb again," Jack said. Long and lean, he stretched his legs out, pulling the creases of his jeans. He sometimes said he wanted to be a Marine like his father. Pup, with brighter, smaller eyes, was not quite fat, but might someday be so. He reached for the fallen Coke can and cursed to find it nearly empty, its contents puddled on the ground. "Yeah, tell us about that Jeff Scott guy and why they never put him in the crypt," Pup added. "This one's real," Reggie said, and for a moment, disappointment crossed his friends' faces, as if his hinting that the other story had not been real was a kind of betrayal. As if to reinforce this, lightning shone once again. "Well, anyway, I know this one's for real because it's in the town history books. They call this the Tomb of the Unknown Man, not because they don't know who he is, but because they don't know what happened to him. It was built for a guy named Jeff Scott. I never found out what, but the town did something to him, and so in the 19th century, a long time after he died, they built him this crypt to say they were sorry. I guess, only when they went to dig up his old grave, Reggie pointed downhill to a ragged group of tilted headstones around a huge oak tree, barely discernible in the night, except when the lightning illuminated it. They found that he wasn't in it. There was just a pile of churned up dirt in the hole. They had studied that gravesite 100 times. The earth now patted down the stone reading, Jeff Scott, 1846 to 1865, had put their hands upon it and tried to draw a meaning and sustenance from it. What happened to him? Pup asked. He knew the good part was coming. He swatted at a mosquito, trapping it on his palm and pinching it between his thumb and forefinger. He watched the blot of bright red that came from it and then wiped his hands on his pants. Reggie's face grew serious. Barney Bates told me he rose up by himself and left Montvale, and that someday he's coming back. Slowly, he looked around at the stone building behind him, and then back at the other boys. I don't know what that means, but Barney Bates says he's coming back to sleep in his tomb. But revenge. A delicious chill crept over Jack and Pup, and they let it wrap around them for a few moments. Did you ever think there might be something locked in there anyway? Pup asked finally, pointing to the vault. The feeling was fading, and he wanted to revive it. Did you think that maybe it's not empty? I think there's a bucket of bats in there, or something worse. Maybe something that would come out and kill everyone in Montvale. Jack said to Pup, laughing. It'd have to be a tough time getting you. There's so much of you to get. A dark look passed over Pup's face. Sometimes, Reggie said dreamily, I do think there's something in there, waiting for me. Cautiously, they looked around at the windows, imagining something moving behind the stained glass. Jesus, Jack said, pointing to what looked like motion, but it was only the weak reflection of a cloud across the winking half-moon. Sometimes I really think there's something in there, Reggie repeated. His voice was low and serious. Jack and Pup looked at each other, and a smile passed between them because they knew what was coming. They knew Reggie was going into one of his real weird moods, one of his death moods, and nothing but a good thrill would come of it. Reggie said, I think there's something in there calling to me. I'd walk up there, the doors would swing open, and it would reach out, whatever it is. The other two boys squirmed. Its touch would be warm and then icy cold. Just a long, blue, vapory arm, trailing off into the darkness behind it. The fingers of the hands would tighten around me and begin to pull me forward. I'd hear something inside, a scratching sound like nails down a blackboard. But I wouldn't be able to get away from the grip of the thing. It's reeling me into the darkness like I'm a fish. Reggie's face resembled a sleepwalker's, and his voice became a whisper. Inside, the scratching sound stops, and there's dead silence. It smells like damp wood in there. At the door, the hand stops, and then it pulls me inside. I hear the door close slowly, and I struggle, but I can't loosen the grip the thing has on me. It's so wet and cold. I begin to shiver. I reach out to the door, trying to stop it from closing, but it clangs shut, and I am in the darkness. Reggie's body was shaking as he spoke, and then he went on, his voice rising, and then something with claws reaches out in the dark and grabs me. With a scream of laughter, he pulled 2 more twig talons from his pockets and leaped at his 2 friends, bowling over them. They rolled on the ground together, squealing, 3 boys as one, and then they separated. Reggie wiped tears of laughter from his eyes, but as he glanced back at the sepulcher, a darkness crossed his features again. You really had us going, man, Pup said. Jack said, I didn't believe it for a second. They looked at him gravely, and he broke into a grin. Well, Reggie and Pup leaped on him, and they rolled around again. Another sheet of lightning glimmered off to the west, making the sky purple and gray. This time, there was a distant thunder, telling the boys that a different kind of lightning was here, rolling toward them with a possible storm. To reinforce this, a thin line of cloud moved across the moon, cutting its half into a quarter. Lightning sparked yet again, and the windows of the mausoleum winked, red and green and blue, and the doorway mouth said, "Ooh," at them before blinking out into the darkness. The three of them brooded. "Hey, Reggie," Pup said. "Tell us what it was like to die." Instantly, the air changed. "Maybe I shouldn't have said that," Pup added, only half sincerely. And Jack said, "Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have, jerk." They regarded Reggie, whose eyes were on the ground. "Not tonight, okay?" he said. "You're not chicken, are you?" Pup asked impulsively. "Hey, Pup," Jack pushed him. "Just kidding," Pup protested. "If you want to get heavy," Jack said, "why don't you tell us about the time you shot the Wiggins cat?" Pup grew quickly angry, his heavy face setting into blue blotches in the warm darkness. "I told you that was an accident, didn't I? Even if it wasn't, the fucking cat deserved it." "Sure it was an accident?" Jack pursued. "I said it was." "Just kidding," Jack mimicked, backing off. He held his hand up for peace. "Really, just kidding." A silence dropped among them. A mood they had carried with them for a long time had somehow fractured. For the first time, without their being able to put a finger on how or why, a crack was forming in their bond. "Well, we're still the Three Musketeers, aren't we?" Jack urged, sensing the change and not wanting it. "I guess so," Pup answered grudgingly, and then he smiled, holding out his fist. The other two held out their fists, and they made the stack of three, the sacred handshake. Another awkward silence engulfed them. "Hey," Pup said, trying to sound nonchalant, "what do you guys think of Lavinia Crawford? You think she's a good looker?" "Good looker?" Jack tried to sound sarcastic, but there was an uneasiness in his manner. They had never really talked, never really thought about girls before. Not the three of them, the Three Musketeers. Pup plunged ahead. "Pretty good looking, don't you think?" "You going to ask her out or something?" Jack inquired. The smirk on his face was artificial. The embarrassment was tangible. It had driven out the tingling chill they had orchestrated among the gravestones and replaced it with this feeling of, well, not what they were about. No one spoke, and then Pup suddenly got to his feet. "Jesus Christ," he said. "What is it with you guys? You going to stay like this forever? Don't you think there's anything else in the world except scaring the crap out of yourselves and building model airplanes?" His face was flushed. He was unsure of himself. "Don't you think there's anything else?" "Like girls?" Jack smirked. Pup turned on him. "Yeah, like girls. Don't you ever think about girls?" Jack hesitated. "Sure." "And that's not only it," Pup continued, his confidence suddenly there. He turned toward Reggie, who had held his silence. "Who made Reggie boss? Why is he always the one that tells the stories, tells us what to do, sets up all the plans?" He turned on Jack again. "You're the jerk who wants to be a Marine when you get older. Who made Reggie God?" Jack answered, shrugging. "I've always done things this way. Don't you think maybe we could turn or something?" Pup turned to Reggie directly. "Hell, I am 14. A 14-year-old boy. A year older than you guys think." "Sure, if you want," Reggie said. "Is that all you've got to say?" Pup was pacing around. "What about you, Marine? Don't you ever want to do anything?" "Like what?" Jack said. "I don't know, like..." Pup faltered, his emotions getting ahead of his mind. There was obvious rage building within him. He stopped and faced Reggie again, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "Why don't you ever talk about the time you almost died?" he shouted. "What's the big deal? You carry it around like a crown, like it's something you don't want anybody else to know about." "Pup," Jack warned, putting a hand on Pup's shoulder. Pup pushed away. "Let me finish. Just because your old man was a hotshot in Vietnam doesn't make you the leader either." He looked at Reggie. "It's like you're some kind of big shot or smarter. You tell us how much you like all this scary stuff, but you've been there. You saw what it was like. You died and then came back, and you won't even tell us. He caught himself in the middle of his tirade and said nothing more. Quietly, Reggie said, I don't talk about it because it bothers me. Pup's head was down. Jack put his hand on Pup's shoulder again, and this time, Pup let it stay. I'm sorry, Reg, Pup said after a moment. He sat down on the grass and crossed his legs. I shouldn't have let my temper blow off like that. It's okay, Reggie replied. He bent down and suddenly jabbed Pup in the ribs, clumsily. I bet Lavinia Crawford doesn't like you guys with bad tempers, so you better watch out. Yeah, Pup began, and then he rose to his feet as a glare of headlights blinded them. Oh shit, he said. It's Poundridge. The mayor's long black Chevy pulled up the rise in front of them. It stopped next to the white picket gate leading into the churchyard. The bright beams of the headlights stabbed at the boys, pinning them like bugs against a board. One long black door opened out. With a light grunt, a thin figure climbed out and made its way toward them. It stopped, said, "Damn!" and walked back to slam the car door shut. Then he was walking in front of the headlights, advancing slowly and wagging a finger. What in the heck are you boys doing up here this time of night? The voice was not altogether harsh, though it did hold a mildly accusatory tone. Not doing mischief, are you? Just sitting and talking, sir, Reggie said. That the Carson boy over there? Poundridge inquired, stopping before them. The headlights behind him made his body seem gaunter than it was. Vaguely, behind the windshield of the car, they could see his small wife, Emma. Talking in a graveyard? Sounds a bit strange to me. Arrogantly, Pup said, It's the truth. You don't want to call us liars and mess with my father about it, do you? Poundridge turned his bird's eye on Pup. I wonder what your father would do if he knew you had sneaked out to sit in a cemetery all night, eh? Not a damn thing, Pup shot back. That'll be enough of that bad talk, Pup Malmut, Poundridge said. There was a sound from the car, and Emma Poundridge's voice came crystal clear. Leave those boys alone, Jonathan. It's summer, and they're not hurting anybody. Probably just telling ghost stories or something of the sort. That right, boys? Jack nodded. Emma Poundridge said, There, you see? Jonathan, Pup, Reggie, Jack, why don't you head on home now? Getting late and there's a storm coming. Her voice was firm and gentle at the same time, and she turned it on her husband. You come back here and leave them alone. Anyway, that television show of yours will be on soon. Well, Poundridge said, scratching his chin, that's true enough. You boys head on home. He turned to go. Mayor Poundridge, Jack asked suddenly, do you know anything about that vault back there? There was another crack of lightning, followed by a snap of thunder, and the first sharp, hot raindrop of the arriving storm. Poundridge looked at the small, square building. Again, he scratched his chin, assuming his speech-making manner. Only what my father told me, and that wasn't much. I got the feeling that his father told him more. Seems it was built for a fellow named Jeff Scott, a Civil War veteran, but they never put him in it. His family owned all that land out behind Barney Bates's place, farmed it, but my father said this Jeff Scott's father built a carousel on the property for all the Montvale kids to use. Poundridge bent down, and a conspiratorial light came into his small eyes. If you boys can keep a secret, I don't mind telling you there's a brand new carousel coming to that property, along with all sorts of other things. An amusement park? Pup said excitedly. Here? The mayor straightened. Any day now. Signed the papers last week. Looks like we'll finally be able to do something with that land. Been fallow a long time. Maybe that'll keep you boys out of graveyards, eh? Jonathan, come on now. It's getting late, Emma called. The mayor waved a hand at her and then held it out to feel for rain. Stopped already. Looks like that storm's going to miss us after all. You boys go on home now. He walked back to the car, stopping halfway. and tell your folks I'll be making a speech at the opening of that amusement park. The car door opened and closed. The Chevy backed down the hill, away from the fence, turned and moved slowly off. The boys saw Mrs. Poundridge's face looking back at them to make sure they left. Guess we should go, Jack said, gathering up the candy wrappers and empty cans they had scattered. We could circle around and come back, Pup said half-heartedly. I'm tired anyway, Reggie said. He was staring at the crypt. I've had enough for tonight. Lightning winked high among the clouds, but there was no thunder. The storm had slipped by. The vault stared at Reggie in the flash, disappeared, stared at him again, disappeared. Reggie's gaze stayed on it in the darkness. He could almost see those swirling vaporous hands at the windows, reaching out for him. Come on, Reg! He turned and blinked out of his daze. Jack and Pup were staring at him, their hands filled with empty soda cans, bottles, and candy wrappers. Down the hill below them, Emma Poundridge's small white face regarded them through the window. Reg, come on, Jack said. I'm coming. He felt the thinnest of touches on his shoulder, the caress of misty fingers. He knew that if he turned, the hands would be there, guiding him, and that the door would open. Those hands would take him, caress him, pull him toward the doorway, and then into the darkness. For a moment, the gentle grip on his shoulder tightened. He almost let it turn him around. But then he took a step forward, following his friends down the hill, and the hands fell away into nothingness. That's the end of chapter 1. I'd say the writing is a little bit clunky at times. Reggie, let's keep in mind, is our main character. I like the relationship with his friends, and I'm curious how long they're going to stay around. As well as maybe could the mayor have some sort of dastardly role in this? I assume his wife is innocent, but you never know with horror. There could always be a twist ahead. Ready for chapter 2? Let's do it. Chapter 2. They say that if you die in your dream, you die for real. Reggie knew he was in the dream. He always knew. And in the middle of this dream, he thought of another dream he had once had that had let him know he was in it. He was in a long foxhole that wound away to the horizon in both directions. He had a dark olive uniform on. There were soldiers all around him. It was very quiet, just before dawn, and a pale orange glow was spreading on the eastern horizon. He could hear the shallow breathing of the men to either side of him. His heart was pounding. He looked over the lip of the foxhole and saw nothing but a long dirt runway. There were pockmarks and a few clumps of close-cropped brush that stood out like crew cuts in the grayish light. Out beyond, at about 100 yards distance, there was another long ditch. They all knew what was in there, and they all knew it was going to rise up and attack them at any time. Reggie held a rifle in his hand, clamming on the wooden stock. He reached up to the barrel. The metal was cool and damp. The man to his right held a bazooka. They waited. The round edge of the sun rose, and in its shadow they saw the thing rise. Its long cylindrical body, almost too burdensome in Earth's gravity, was slowly hauled out of the ditch by tentacles that reached and curled tens of yards in every direction. As it advanced, it yowled like a cat in the heat, a long, ponderous, terrifying sound. "Hold your fire," someone said close by. Someone else began to whimper. The thing half crawled, half rolled toward them, and suddenly someone broke, crying out and climbing backward out of the ditch and making a run for it. An officer scrambled out to block his way and hit the man square in the face. The man went down. "Nowhere to run, soldier," the sergeant said, and carried the man back to the ditch and threw him in. "Hold your fire," the captain said again. and this time he could not hide the tremor in his voice. The creature was 50 yards from them, sliding over the ground, throwing up great clumps of mud and dirt in its wake, and twirling its tentacles in the air. 30 yards. Abruptly it rolled toward them, tucking in its long arms and turning over 3 or 4 times, closing the gap to 10 yards. They could see the great oily mass of its body. The sun looked like a huge orange wart on its back. "Hold," the captain repeated, his voice not believing what it was saying. Suddenly, the knot in Reggie's stomach loosened, and he stood up in the ditch, directly in the path of the thing that bore down on them. "Don't worry," he shouted, holding his hands up for attention. "This is only a dream. Nothing can happen to you. This is only a dream." And then the thing rolled straight at him, and he screamed, and he had suddenly awakened. They say that if you die in your dream, you die for real. Here, in this dream, he heard his mother say goodbye. Her voice was muffled, as far away, and then he heard the front door slam, and the screen door behind it. When he tried to get out of bed, the sheet pressed down on him. He fought against it. It was as if the cloth was a sheet of metal held down by weights, but finally he threw it off. It clanged to the door behind him as he rushed to the window. The door of the red car was just slamming shut. He tried to open the window, but it would not lift. He pounded on it and shouted while the engine gunned into life, and the car slid backward out of the driveway. Try as he might, he could not move the window. The scene blurred and shifted. He held a sneaker in his hand, fumbling with the laces, and then suddenly it was on his foot. Somehow he was outside now. His feet were pumping up and down, as if he were running. He looked down and saw that he was on a bicycle. It was his own bike, he knew, but it was trying to throw him, as if it were a bucking horse. He held the handle grips tight. The back wheel kept bouncing into the air. "Whoa, boy," he said, and abruptly the bicycle was still. He looked up and saw his house receding behind him. The bike made a turn, and he was on Independence Street, heading toward Maine. He was picking up speed. It was early morning. The air smelled like fresh coffee and wet grass. The bicycle moved like the wind. When he lifted his feet from the pedals kept turning. He put his feet back on them, and they turned even faster, making his feet and legs ache. I love the smell of old books. The bike banked sharply, making the air rush by his head, and he was on Main Street. Up ahead, he could make out shops, a gas station, a newspaper store, a donut shop. In front of the donut shop, parked at a careless angle, was a red and white car with round red lights at the back and worn black walls. There was a dent from a parking accident on the driver's side. He knew for sure that it was the right car. "Dad?" he called out, but his voice seemed swallowed by the wind as the bike hurtled along. He saw the glass door to the donut shop open, and his father walked out. There was a paper under his arm. "Dad!" Reggie called again, but his father did not hear him. Instead, he walked to the dented car door and put his hand on the handle to open it. Reggie called out once more, and now his father turned. Reggie saw that it was not his voice that had made him turn, but another sound. The bicycle swerved to the left lane in front of the donut shop. There was a desperate sound of hard-hit brakes. Reggie looked up to see, looming over him, the square, white front of a milk truck. The driver's mouth was open. His body arched back as his foot jammed on the brake pedal. Reggie saw each tiny detail on the front of the truck: the yellow inspection sticker on the corner of the window, the long tarnished grille, the oval headlights. The headlights went away. The morning, his father, the red, white, and blue, the red and white car. I always say red, white, and blue. You never really say red, white, you know. You always picture blue in there. Red and white car, the donut shop, the milk truck, everything went away. It was as some gigantic, unseen hands had painted them on a rubber canvas and then pulled the canvas to one side. In their place, behind the canvas, was only whiteness. This happened. I'm dying, Reggie thought. He knew it was a dream. He knew he could stand up and say, "Don't worry, this is only a dream." But he knew this time it would make no difference. It was a dream, but it was really happening. If you die in your dream, you die for real. He knew that he was reliving it again, and he knew that if they did not get to him in time, didn't pull him back. The world was made of rubber and was being pulled aside, and behind it, behind the world, there was nothing but whiteness. Above it, there was a round black canopy. The canopy dropped toward him, curving down over him, forming a tunnel. He had a glimpse of his father pulling off overhead. Behind the forming tunnel, his face and body, thin, stretched rubber. Reggie tried to say goodbye. All he wanted to do was say goodbye, but he could say nothing. He could only watch. His father's face was shouting something, his long rubber arms reaching. Then he was gone. The whiteness was gone then too. And Reggie was in the dark tunnel and alone. There was a whooshing sound around him. The tunnel was like an air shaft. He stabilized, coming erect. Again. And the tunnel was solid now. There was a silence. He turned to look behind him, his body floating like the pictures he'd seen of astronauts in freefall. He was able to turn with ease. Behind him, the tunnel stretched cavernously. At its end, there was a dim gray light. Someone was standing in the light. Reggie could not make out who it was. The figure was too far away and too small. He turned round again and saw that the other end of the tunnel was closer. There was a bright light at this end, and he was slowly drifting toward it. The light was almost blinding. It reached out and bathed him. Although it was bright, it did not hurt his eyes, but rather soothed them. Something marred the brightness of the light at its center, and now, as he drifted closer, he saw that there was a figure standing here. The light surrounded it completely. Reggie shielded his eyes, but he could not see who the figure was. It stood there silently, and Reggie could feel the weight of its vision on him. He drifted nearer. He could see nothing of its body, but now two eyes in its face, two enormous eyes, became apparent. They were as big as small plates, and they were snaring Reggie like a docking ship. He was becoming lost in those huge orbs, in the bright, beautiful light around them. He felt himself flowing into them, becoming part of them. There was a cold breath behind Reggie's ear. Sudden fear bolted through him. He turned to see that the other end of the tunnel had collapsed toward him. The gray light was right behind him, and something filled it. Something huge and dark, bending down over him, opening its mouth, beginning to speak. "I'm dying!" Reggie tried to scream. The enormous eyes were still in front of him, but they made no move to help him. Why didn't they save him from this dark, cold thing? Time was suspended. He knew that if another tick of the clock passed, the dark shape looming over him would speak its words. He was tottering on a ledge, and he would fall over it. Why wouldn't the eyes help him? If you die in your dream, you die for real. He felt the tick of time. The dark mouth began to speak. There was a blankness, and then hands were on him, human hands, and he looked up to see the tunnel peeling back, disintegrating around him. The dark shape disappeared. The eyes faded away, but he felt that something he couldn't remember, had passed between them and through him. Some bond of that ticking moment in time that had begun. And then they were gone, and the white rubber canvas was there, wrapping down around him as hands pulled him up and he cried out. He was on his stomach in his bed, his hands clutching the sides of the mattress. For a moment, he could not move. The dream had come again, the dream that repeated what had really happened to him. And once again, he had almost come too close to return. Once again, that tick of time had almost lengthened eternity. From the brink of death, they had said. Reggie knew it was true. Those eyes and that light in the tunnel had been real, and then he had been yanked back. He had been dead, and then he had been alive again. He had been there on the very edge, on the lip of some other place. The eyes had been drawing him into it, and then the doctors had reached into the tunnel and pulled their cold, gloved hands on him and brought him back. Each time the dream repeated exactly what had happened, and each time he came to the very moment of knowing who and what. They say if you die in your dream, they always came back. He turned over slowly and sat up. The front of his pajamas was soaked in chilled sweat. He sat still for a moment, head down and eyes closed. What was there? What happened when you fell over that ledge? The fear of that huge, dark shadow and the warmth of those enormous eyes haunted him. What was beyond that moment of time? His mother eased the door open and stuck her head into the room. "Reggie?" she called sleepily. "You okay?" He opened his eyes and looked at her. She came into the room and sat down on the bed. "Reggie, are you ever going to stop having that dream?" she asked softly. "I don't know, Mom." His mother was silent. Reggie studied her face, almost old at 39. The creamy black features beginning to wrinkle slightly, the soft brown eyes beginning to tire just a bit. His mother was a beautiful woman. "Reggie," she began, then hesitated, slapping one hand on the other in frustration. "Reggie, it's been 6 years. Don't you think it's time to forget?" Again, she slapped her hand, and her voice became almost angry. "You're 13 years old." She rose, walked a few steps, and then turned. "All these things you've got, all these things that have to do with death." She pointed to a poster over Reggie's bed, a faded reproduction of Bruehl's The Triumph of Death, and waved a hand at the death totems scattered around the room, monster heads that glowed in the dark, a grinning skull mask made of rubber, hanging on one post of the bed, rows of wax fangs and claws on the bookshelves, a plastic model of a working guillotine, its basket containing a small chopped-off head that looked up with a startled, open-mouthed expression, the eyes wide. Image. That was a long sentence. The only other object in the room was a framed photograph of a handsome young man in uniform, smiling, and the rest of it all over the house. The horror movie cassettes, the handmade mummy in the cellar, the rubber spiders and bats hanging in the bathroom, skulls everywhere, not to mention all the other things you have in that clubhouse you keep with your friends. Don't you think you've gone far enough with this stuff? "It's just what I'm interested in," he said slowly. "I worry about you," his mother said, coming to the bed and pulling him close to her. "I really do worry." "There's nothing to worry about," Reggie said. "It's just something I'm interested in." She held him closer. "If I ever lost you, I don't know what I'd do. I just don't know." She began to tremble, and then she was sobbing. Reggie didn't know what to say. "Nothing's going to happen to me, Mom," he muttered. She finally let him go and wiped her eyes. For a moment there was silence, and when she spoke, her voice was low. "Reggie, I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before. I was with you in the hospital, holding your hand when you went away. I felt you leave. Right at that moment, I felt it. Your hand was warm, and then it got so cold for a second that I thought I was imagining it. That's when the doctors started to yell. They pushed me out of the way. One of them said, 'He's gone.' I already knew you were dead." She paused and went on with difficulty. "At that moment, I promised that if you came back, I'd give up anything in this world. She looked deep into his eyes. Anything, Reggie. And you came back. They brought you back, and then her eyes filled with tears. She covered her face with her hands. And then when your father died in Lebanon, and he never came home again, I felt so guilty. She was unable to go on for a moment. I loved your father so much. Much? There's no past tense of much. But I promised to give up anything. Mom, she held him again and quickly composed herself. I just don't want to ever lose you, she said. I don't want anything bad to ever happen to you. I know, Mom. She hugged him and then let him go, easing him back against his pillow. You sleep well now, she said, straightening up. No more dreams, okay? She left, turning the silent switch to darken the room again. Reggie stared at the closed door. He thought about her and his father together, remembering fragments. The three of them at a pond feeding the ducks, the ripples of the warm water lapping toward them. A Christmas tree, his father laughing as it lay in the stand at a crooked angle. His mother coming into the room, her eyes lighting up like the Christmas lights. His father mowing the lawn, stopping as Reggie went by, letting the lawnmower idle while he picked Reggie up, throwing him high into the sky and catching him tight as he fell. Sky boy, sky boy, he shouted, tossing him up again. He remembered one more thing, a birthday. He remembered hearing his father in the garage below his bedroom the night before. The July heat had bathed him as he lay comfortably in bed, listening to his father labor away at the bicycle he had asked for, singing while he put it together, the bicycle he had found in the garage, complete early the next morning as his father was called away to base, to leave for Lebanon, even before he had eaten all his breakfast. The bicycle Reggie had tried to catch up with him on, seeing the car where his father had stopped to grab a cup of coffee, only wanting to say thanks and goodbye. And then the milk truck. He turned over in bed, knelt by the headboard, and switched on the reading light to study the poster of the Triumph of Death. It was a huge canvas, a vast panorama with 1,000 bony skeletons and screaming bodies. There was nowhere those people could turn. The skeletons formed phalanxes, and patrols were hunting them down. Only one figure in the entire picture seemed to be resisting. A foot soldier in the lower right-hand corner was drawing his sword against the advancing bone men. Reggie's gaze roamed over the fields of bodies. Is this what death is like? To him, it had been a shocked thud, blackness in the mystery of the tunnel. What was over that ledge? He was growing tired. His lids began to get heavy. For a moment, the poster, like that white, elastic canvas, had been seen after the truck hit him. And there, superimposed on it, was another vision. All of Montvale turned into a vast landscape of death. Across it strode a tall figure, a man, and yet not a man. His face so white as to be no color at all. His tall, sharp frame moving like a sickle through the world. His eyes were the absence of eyes, his mouth a cruel, thin, red slit, his black suit a form of nothingness. He looked to the left, right, and then his eyes turned to Reggie with a horrible pout. And suddenly Reggie was in the poster. In the lower right-hand corner, the long soldier drawing a weak blade made merely of metal. Reggie blinked awake. His hands were resting on the headboard, his body hunched up in a half kneel. The poster over the bed was the same as always. Slowly, almost too tired to move, he slipped down and turned over, sliding under the covers. The bed was warm. He tried to open his eyes, to stare at the ceiling, to think. His lids closed. He dreamed again, but he heard his mother say, goodbye. That's the end of chapter 2. Seems like dreams could become a part of this. I'm curious how they're going to play. And isn't that heartbreaking that, you learn about Reggie's death and the fact that it happened while he was on his way to say goodbye to his father, while his father was leaving for Lebanon, and that was the last time he would see his father? What a gut punch. Next week, we'll share with you chapters 3 and 4. We hope you've enjoyed chapters 1 and 2, and we hope to see you again next week on another episode of Secondhand Horror.